Why do you have my mother's eyes? The question never left Charlotte Whitmore's mind, because the moment she saw the little girl across the ballroom, the world seemed to pause around her. The annual Bright Futures Children's Charity Gala was the kind of event Charlotte attended every year. Crystal chandeliers shimmered above polished marble floors. Soft piano music drifted through the air. Waiters moved quietly between tables carrying sparkling water and small plates of appetizers. Everything was elegant. Everything was predictable. And Charlotte liked it that way. As the CEO of Whitmore Global Holdings, she had spent years building a reputation for control, discipline, and flawless execution. Investors trusted her. Employees admired her. Business magazines called her one of the most powerful women in America. Yet none of those accomplishments prepared her for the little girl standing beside the dessert table. Charlotte had just finished speaking with several board members when she noticed her. The child couldn't have been older than 8. She wore a simple light blue dress and a pair of white shoes that looked slightly worn at the edges. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She wasn't seeking attention. She simply stood there smiling as she carefully arranged paper napkins that had fallen from a nearby table. "Need some help?" an elderly guest asked. "I got it," the little girl replied cheerfully. "My daddy says if you see a problem and can fix it, you should help." The guest chuckled warmly. "Your daddy sounds smart." "He is," she said proudly. "He just doesn't brag about it." Something about the exchange made Charlotte smile. Then the girl looked up. Charlotte froze. The room was still full of conversation. Glasses clinked softly. Laughter echoed near the stage. But all Charlotte could hear was the pounding of her own heartbeat. The child's eyes were impossible. Clear blue. Bright. Gentle. Identical to the eyes in every photograph Charlotte kept of her late mother. For a moment, she thought her mind was playing tricks on her. It had been 15 years since her mother passed away. 15 years since Charlotte had stood beside a hospital bed promising she would take care of the family. Yet somehow those same eyes were staring back at her now from the face of a little girl she had never met. Charlotte slowly approached. "Hello," she said. The girl smiled immediately. "Hi. What's your name?" "Lily Brooks." "I'm Charlotte." "Nice to meet you, Charlotte." Her voice was sweet and confident. Not rehearsed. Not shy. Just genuine. Charlotte found herself unusually nervous. "Are you here with your family?" Lily pointed toward the far side of the ballroom. "My dad's over there." Charlotte followed her gaze. Near one of the back tables stood a man in a simple navy suit. Unlike most guests, he wasn't networking. He wasn't chasing opportunities. He was watching his daughter with quiet attention, the kind only devoted parents seem to possess. Every few seconds Lily glanced toward him, and every time, he smiled back. Charlotte felt an unfamiliar ache in her chest. She looked at Lily again. The eyes, the smile, even the shape of her face stirred memories she couldn't explain. Then Lily reached into her small purse and pulled out a folded photograph. "That's my mommy," she said proudly. Charlotte accepted the picture. The moment she saw the woman in the photograph, every breath left her lungs. Because the face staring back at her looked remarkably familiar, and for the first time in years, Charlotte Whitmore felt something she could not control, a mystery that seemed deeply connected to her own family. Charlotte stared at the photograph for several seconds longer than she should have. The sounds of the gala faded into the background as questions crowded her mind. The woman in the picture was smiling beneath a bright summer sky, one arm wrapped around a young Lily. There was nothing unusual about the image itself. It was the woman's face that unsettled her. The resemblance to her own family was impossible to ignore. "My mommy took me fishing that day," Lily said softly. She said catching fish was mostly about patience. Charlotte looked down at the little girl. "She sounds wonderful." Lily nodded. She was. The simple answer carried a sadness that felt older than an 8-year-old should know. Before Charlotte could ask another question, the man from across the room approached. His pace was calm and unhurried. He did not seem concerned or suspicious. He simply looked like a father making sure his daughter was comfortable. "Everything okay, Lil?" he asked. "Yep," Lily said brightly. "I was talking to Charlotte." The man offered a polite smile. "I hope she was not causing too much trouble." Charlotte almost laughed. "Actually, I think she has been helping me more than I have helped her." Lily grinned proudly. "See, Dad? I told you helping people works." The man shook his head with quiet amusement. "Apparently you were right." For the first time, Charlotte found herself studying him carefully. Ethan Brooks looked nothing like the executives and investors who filled the ballroom. His navy suit was clean, but clearly not custom-tailored. His shoes showed signs of wear. Yet there was something steady about him. Something grounded. He carried himself with a quiet dignity that did not seek approval. "Your daughter is remarkable," Charlotte said. "Thank you," Ethan replied. "I happen to agree. You must be very proud. Every day." There was no hesitation in his answer. No performance. Just truth. Charlotte noticed it immediately. Most people at events like this spoke as though they were selling something. Ethan sounded like a man with nothing to prove. A waiter passed nearby carrying glasses of sparkling water. Ethan picked one up and handed it to Lily before taking one for himself. "You enjoying the event?" Charlotte asked. "Lily is," he said. "That makes it worth attending. You do not enjoy charity galas?" "I enjoy seeing her happy." Charlotte smiled despite herself. "That sounds like a diplomatic answer." "Maybe." His eyes softened as he glanced at Lily. "The truth is, I am more comfortable in small places. Bookstores, parks, school plays, places where people do not spend all night talking about themselves." Charlotte raised an eyebrow. "That eliminates most of this room." Ethan chuckled. "I was trying to be polite." Lily giggled between them. The conversation should have ended there. Instead, Charlotte found herself wanting it to continue. It was unfamiliar. Most people approached her because of her title. Ethan seemed completely uninterested in it. In fact, she was not entirely sure he knew who she was. "What do you do, Ethan?" she asked. "I teach high school history." Charlotte blinked. Somehow that surprised her. "Do you enjoy it?" "I love it. Even with everything teachers deal with these days." Ethan nodded. "History teaches people who they are. I think that matters." The answer lingered with Charlotte. It was simple, honest, the kind of answer that came from conviction rather than ambition. Then Lily reached into her purse again. "Daddy, can I show Charlotte the picture album?" Ethan smiled. "If she wants to see it." Charlotte looked down at the little girl. "I would love to." Neither of them noticed the strange tension that crossed Ethan's face for the briefest moment. But somewhere deep inside Charlotte, a feeling had begun to grow. The photograph she had seen was not an accident. And she was becoming increasingly certain that meeting this father and daughter tonight was not an accident either. The ballroom seemed warmer now, filled with the soft glow of crystal chandeliers and the quiet hum of conversation, but Charlotte barely noticed any of it. Her attention remained fixed on Lily as the little girl carefully opened a small photo album she had pulled from her purse. "I carry it everywhere," Lily explained. "Daddy says some people keep important things in their hearts, but it is okay to keep them in a photo album too." Ethan smiled. "I may have said something like that." Lily sat down at a nearby table and spread the album open between them. "This is my favorite one." Charlotte leaned closer. The first few pages showed ordinary moments. Birthday cakes, school plays, a fishing trip beside a calm lake, a Christmas morning with wrapping paper scattered across a living room floor. There was something beautiful about the simplicity of it all. No luxury resorts. No private jets. No magazine covers. Just a father and daughter building a life together one memory at a time. "Your dad takes good pictures," Charlotte said. "He takes a lot of them," Lily replied. "He says memories disappear if nobody protects them." Ethan looked, slightly embarrassed. "I teach history. It is a professional hazard." Lily turned another page. This was Mommy's favorite place. Charlotte felt her chest tighten. The photograph showed the same woman she had seen earlier standing in front of a small white farmhouse surrounded by wildflowers. The resemblance still unsettled her. Not because the woman looked exactly like someone Charlotte knew. It was something deeper than that. Familiar features, familiar expressions, familiar eyes. The kind of similarities that lingered long after logic tried to dismiss them. "She was beautiful," Charlotte said softly. Lily nodded. "Everybody says that." "What was her name?" "Grace." Charlotte repeated the name silently. Grace Brooks. She had never heard it before, yet somehow it felt important. Lily flipped several more pages until a folded photograph slipped loose from the album and drifted onto the table. "Oops." She reached for it, but Charlotte picked it up first. The moment she looked at it, her breath caught. The image was older than the others. The colors had faded with time. It showed a young woman standing beside an elderly lady on a front porch. Both were smiling at the camera. Around the older woman's neck hung a silver pendant. Charlotte immediately recognized it. Her pulse quickened. She knew that pendant. Not one like it. The exact design. A delicate compass rose surrounded by tiny engraved flowers. For decades, it had been a treasured symbol in the Whitmore family. Charlotte's grandmother had owned one. There had even been old photographs of it stored in family archives. Where did this picture come from? Charlotte asked quietly. Ethan looked over. Grace found it among some family belongings years ago. She always kept it. Did she ever say who the people were? Ethan shook his head. Not really. She told me she never knew much about her biological family. Charlotte stared at the photograph again. The edges trembled slightly in her hands. She was adopted? As an infant, Ethan replied. Most of the records were sealed. Grace spent years trying to learn more, but she never found many answers. For a moment, nobody spoke. The sounds of the gala seemed distant. Now, glasses clinked somewhere across the ballroom. Soft piano notes floated through the air. Yet Charlotte felt as though she were standing alone with a mystery that had suddenly stepped out of the shadows. Lily pointed at the photograph. Mommy always wondered who those people were. Charlotte slowly looked up. Something had shifted. A simple conversation at a charity event was beginning to feel like something else entirely. And deep inside, a question she could not ignore was growing louder with every passing second. Charlotte left the gala later that evening with the old photograph still occupying every corner of her thoughts. The city skyline glowed beyond the tinted windows of her car as traffic rolled steadily through downtown Chicago. Normally, she used the drive home to answer emails or review reports. Tonight, she ignored her phone completely. She sat quietly in the back seat staring out at the passing lights. The image of the silver pendant refused to leave her mind. By the time she arrived at Whitmore Manor, nearly 11 o'clock had come and gone. The estate stood exactly as it always had, elegant and imposing against the night sky. Yet for the first time in years, Charlotte did not feel comforted by its familiar appearance. She stepped inside, greeted the house staff with a polite smile, and headed directly toward a section of the mansion few visitors ever saw. The family archive occupied an entire wing of the lower level. Generations of records, journals, photographs, letters, and documents were carefully preserved there. Her grandfather believed family history was sacred. Charlotte suddenly hoped he had been right. The room smelled faintly of old paper and polished wood. Soft overhead lights illuminated rows of filing cabinets and climate-controlled shelves. She removed her jacket, rolled up her sleeves, and began searching. "Show me what I am missing," she whispered to herself. Hours passed. She examined family albums dating back decades. She studied photographs of reunions, weddings, vacations, and holiday gatherings. Again and again, she found images of the silver pendant. Her grandmother wore it constantly during her younger years. Yet something else began to emerge. A pattern, or perhaps more accurately, an absence. There were photographs that seemed incomplete. Certain years contained surprisingly few records. Entire folders appeared thinner than expected. Charlotte frowned. That does not make sense. She opened another cabinet. Then another. Her heartbeat gradually accelerated. Several documents referenced family events that should have included photographs or correspondence. But the supporting records were gone. Not misplaced. Removed. Deliberately. The realization sent a chill through her. Someone had not simply forgotten to preserve pieces of family history. Someone had erased them. Charlotte continued searching until nearly 2 in the morning. Finally, she found a small ledger tucked between 2 oversized albums. It belonged to her late grandfather. Most entries detailed routine family matters. Birthdays, business meetings, charitable donations. Then one line stopped her cold. October 12, 1985. Family matter resolved. Records secured. Future protected. Charlotte read the sentence 3 times. It was unusually vague. Her grandfather had never written like that. Every other entry was specific, precise, honest. This one felt different. It felt hidden. She sat back slowly in her chair. The silence inside the archive seemed heavier now. Outside, a light rain tapped gently against the basement windows. Somewhere deep within the mansion, an antique clock chimed 2 times. Charlotte looked again at the ledger. Family matter resolved. Records secured. Future protected. Protected from what? Protected from whom? The questions multiplied. Then another memory surfaced. Years ago, when Charlotte was a teenager, she had overheard her mother arguing with her grandfather behind a closed study door. The conversation had ended abruptly when they realized she was nearby. At the time, she dismissed it. Now she remembered a single sentence. You cannot erase family simply because it is inconvenient. Charlotte's breath caught. She had not thought about those words in over 20 years. Yet tonight they returned with startling clarity. She slowly closed the ledger and stared into the quiet room. Somewhere between the missing records, the mysterious photograph, the pendant, and Grace Brooks, a story had been buried for decades. And for the first time, Charlotte was beginning to suspect that her family was not as complete as she had always believed. Charlotte slept less than 3 hours. By sunrise, she was already dressed and sitting inside the rear seat of her car as it traveled through the northern suburbs. The morning sky was painted with pale shades of blue and gold. Commuters filled the highways. Coffee shops buzzed with early customers. Yet Charlotte noticed almost none of it. The ledger rested beside her. So did copies of several photographs she had pulled from the family archive before dawn. One name kept appearing in old records connected to her grandfather's estate. Walter Hensley, family attorney, retired, age 82. If anyone still knew the truth, Charlotte believed it would be him. The car eventually turned onto a quiet tree-lined street in Evanston. Small brick homes sat neatly behind white fences. Gardens bloomed with late spring flowers. It was the kind of neighborhood where people waved from their porches and remembered their neighbors' birthdays. Charlotte stepped out and approached a modest 2-story home. A wind chime swayed gently near the front door. She knocked once, then waited. Several moments later the door opened. Walter Hensley stood before her. H had bent his shoulders slightly, but his eyes remained sharp. "Charlotte Whitmore," he said with surprise. "I was not expecting company this morning. I apologize for arriving unannounced. You never needed an appointment with me." He smiled warmly. "You were practically family." She followed him into a comfortable living room filled with books and framed photographs. The scent of fresh coffee lingered in the air. Walter motioned toward a chair. "What can I do for you?" Charlotte carefully placed the old photograph and the copy of the ledger entry on the table between them. The smile disappeared from his face immediately. He stared at the items in silence. "Walter," Charlotte said softly, "who was erased from my family?" The elderly man lowered his eyes. "Charlotte, please." Her voice was calm, but steady. "I need the truth." Walter leaned back slowly. For several seconds neither spoke. Outside, a lawn sprinkler clicked rhythmically somewhere across the street. Finally, he removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "I prayed this day would never come," he whispered. Charlotte felt her pulse quicken. "Then there is something." Walter nodded once. "There was a child." The room seemed to grow still. "A child? Your grandmother gave birth to 2 daughters." Charlotte froze. "2? Yes." The answer landed like a stone in quiet water. "My mother had a sister?" Walter closed his eyes briefly. "A younger sister." Charlotte could barely breathe. Why was she never mentioned? The old attorney stared at the photograph. "Because your grandfather believed hiding the truth would protect everyone involved." "Protect them from what?" Walter hesitated. "Scandal. Family conflict. Public attention. The kind of fears powerful people often convince themselves are more important than love." Charlotte looked away. The words hurt because they sounded believable. "What happened to the child?" Walter's expression softened with sadness. "Complicated circumstances led to her being placed with another family while she was still very young. And my mother knew? Eventually." Charlotte remembered the argument she had overheard years ago. Suddenly it made sense. She wanted to find her, did she not? Walter nodded. "Your mother spent years searching. Did she ever succeed?" Silence filled the room again. Walter looked toward the window. His voice grew quieter. "No, not before she passed away." Charlotte felt a sharp ache settle in her chest. Her mother had carried that loss her entire life. A sister she could never find. A family connection stolen by secrets. Then Walter reached toward the photograph and touched the image of the young woman standing on the porch. His hand trembled slightly. "But when I saw this picture," he said softly, "I realized something." Charlotte leaned forward. "What?" Walter looked directly into her eyes. Tears had begun forming in his own. "The woman in that photograph bears an extraordinary resemblance to the missing child. More than resemblance, if I am being honest. Charlotte, I believe you may have finally found her family." Charlotte left Walter Hensley's home carrying far more than answers. She carried the weight of a family secret that had survived for decades. The afternoon sun hung low as her car moved through quiet suburban streets, but her thoughts remained fixed on one person. Grace Brooks, the woman in the photographs. The woman who had spent years searching for a family she never found. If Walter was right, Grace had been the missing sister her mother had searched for until the very end of her life. And now Grace was gone too. Charlotte stared out the window as neighborhoods drifted past. There was only one way forward. She needed to speak with Ethan. 2 days later, she found herself standing on the front porch of a modest white house on a peaceful street lined with maple trees. Children's bicycles rested near driveways. Wind stirred gently through the branches overhead. It was the kind of neighborhood where life moved at a slower pace. A place built on routine, family, and familiarity. Charlotte hesitated before knocking. Moments later, the door opened. Ethan looked surprised to see her. "Charlotte, I hope I am not interrupting." "Not at all." He stepped aside. "Please come in." The house felt warm and lived in. Family photographs decorated the walls. Books filled wooden shelves. The scent of cinnamon and fresh coffee lingered in the air. Somewhere upstairs, music played softly. "Lily is finishing homework," Ethan explained. "She will be excited to see you." Charlotte smiled. "I would like that." They sat across from each other at the kitchen table. For a moment, neither spoke. Sunlight filtered through the windows and painted soft patterns across the hardwood floor. Finally, Charlotte looked up. "I have been researching Grace's family history." Ethan's expression shifted immediately. Not defensive, curious. "Did you find something?" "Maybe." Ethan leaned forward slightly. "Grace spent years looking for answers." His voice softened. "She always felt there was a missing piece somewhere." Charlotte listened quietly. She never talked about it much. Not because she did not care. Because it hurt. Ethan glanced toward a framed photograph on the counter. Grace smiled back from the image, frozen in a moment of happiness. She would spend hours going through old records, he continued, searching genealogy databases, writing letters, following leads that never went anywhere. Did she ever find anything useful? Ethan nodded slowly. "A few things." He stood and walked toward a nearby cabinet. After a moment, he returned carrying a worn leather box. He placed it carefully on the table. "These belong to Grace." Charlotte felt her pulse quicken. Ethan opened the box. Inside were letters, photographs, handwritten notes, and newspaper clippings gathered over many years. The contents reflected hope, persistence, determination. A woman refusing to stop searching for where she came from. Charlotte carefully lifted one folded document. "What is this?" "The only adoption paperwork Grace ever found." Charlotte unfolded it. Much of the information had been redacted decades ago. Names were missing. Dates were incomplete. Yet one detail remained visible. A notation identifying the child as part of a private placement handled through a legal trust connected to Chicago. Charlotte's heart skipped. The Whitmore family had operated several legal trusts in Chicago during that same period. She looked at Ethan. Did Grace ever suspect who her family might be? Ethan smiled sadly. Sometimes she imagined they were ordinary people who never stopped thinking about her. He paused. Other times she worried they had forgotten. Silence settled between them. Then footsteps sounded from upstairs. Lily appeared moments later carrying a notebook. Her face brightened instantly. "Charlotte." She ran over and hugged her without hesitation. Charlotte wrapped her arms around the little girl and felt an unexpected ache in her chest. Looking into those familiar blue eyes, she realized something with startling clarity. Grace had spent her life searching for family. She never knew how close she actually was. And now, sitting beside her daughter, Charlotte could no longer ignore the possibility that the final answers were closer than either of them had ever imagined. For the next several days, Charlotte carried the truth alone, not because she wanted to keep secrets, but because she needed certainty before she changed 3 lives forever. Every clue pointed in the same direction. The missing sister, Grace Brooks, Lily. The pieces fit together with almost frightening precision. Yet Charlotte knew that family history was too important to build on assumptions. She needed proof. Real proof. The kind that left no room for doubt. On a quiet Thursday afternoon, she sat inside a private genetic counseling office overlooking Lake Michigan. Rain drifted gently across the windows. The city skyline appeared softened by gray clouds. Across the desk, a specialist reviewed documents with calm professionalism. Charlotte listened carefully as procedures were explained. Every step would remain confidential. Every result would be scientifically verified. Still, her hands felt unusually cold. For someone who negotiated billion-dollar deals without hesitation, waiting suddenly felt impossible. The samples had already been collected through legally authorized family records and voluntary participation connected to genealogy research. Now there was nothing left to do except wait. 3 days later, Charlotte received a call. The results are ready. She thanked the specialist and ended the conversation. Then she sat motionless for nearly a minute. Her office overlooked downtown Chicago from the 50th floor. Cars moved below like tiny streams of light. Employees walked through hallways outside her door. Meetings continued. Phones rang. Business carried on. Yet her entire world had narrowed to a single envelope waiting downstairs. An hour later, she entered the consultation room. The specialist greeted her kindly. "Please have a seat." Charlotte nodded. Her heartbeat felt unusually loud. The folder rested on the table between them. The specialist opened it carefully. "We reviewed all available records and genetic markers." Charlotte remained silent. "The findings are conclusive." She swallowed. "Conclusive?" "Yes." The specialist offered a gentle smile. "Grace Brooks was directly related to your maternal family line." Charlotte closed her eyes briefly. Even though she expected the answer, hearing it spoken aloud felt different. It felt real. "And Lily?" she asked quietly. The specialist looked down at the report. "Lily Brooks is the biological granddaughter of the missing sister identified in your family records." The room disappeared around her. For a moment, all she could see was a little girl standing beside a dessert table, smiling as she picked up fallen napkins. Lily, the child with her mother's eyes. The child who had spent her entire life unaware that a family had been searching for her long before she was born. Charlotte lowered her head. Tears slipped quietly down her cheeks. Not dramatic tears. Not tears of shock. The kind that arrive when something lost has finally been found. She thought about her mother. About years spent searching. About unanswered questions. About holidays that felt incomplete without knowing why. "She found her," Charlotte whispered. The specialist looked confused. "Excuse me." Charlotte smiled through her tears. "My mother spent years searching for her sister." Her voice trembled softly. She never knew she found her. That evening, Charlotte drove to a small park near Ethan's neighborhood. She sat alone on a bench overlooking a pond where ducks drifted across still water. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of gold and amber. Children laughed nearby. Families walked hand in hand along winding paths. Charlotte held the report in her lap. The answers were finally here. Yet another realization settled quietly into her heart. The discovery was not about inheritance. It was not about family wealth. It was not even about the past anymore. It was about a little girl who had no idea that somewhere in the world she still had family. Real family. Family who would have loved her all along if they had only known she existed. And for the first time since this journey began, Charlotte understood exactly what she needed to do next. 3 days after receiving the results, Charlotte returned to Ethan's house carrying no legal documents, no attorneys, and no business proposals. She had spent her entire career solving problems through contracts and negotiations. This was different. This required honesty. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the quiet neighborhood as she walked up the familiar front path. For the first time in years, she felt nervous. Ethan opened the door before she could knock twice. "Charlotte." He smiled politely. Then he noticed her expression. "Is everything okay?" Charlotte nodded slowly. "May we talk?" A few minutes later, they sat at the kitchen table while Lily worked on a school project in the living room. Colored markers and construction paper covered the coffee table. Soft music played quietly from a nearby speaker. The ordinary comfort of the house somehow made what Charlotte needed to say even more difficult. Ethan studied her face. "You found something, did you not?" Charlotte took a deep breath. "Yes." The room fell quiet. Ethan waited patiently. Charlotte appreciated that about him. He never rushed people. He never demanded answers. "I completed the research." Her voice remained calm. "And I confirmed Grace's family history." Ethan's eyes softened immediately at the mention of his late wife. "What did you learn?" Charlotte carefully placed a folder on the table, but did not open it. Grace was searching for her biological family her entire life. Ethan nodded. "I know." She was closer than she ever realized. For several seconds, he simply stared at her. Then something changed in his expression. Understanding arrived before the words did. "Charlotte," she nodded. "The missing sister my family lost decades ago was Grace." Ethan leaned back slowly. Neither spoke. The kitchen clock ticked softly on the wall. Outside, a lawn mower hummed somewhere down the street. Finally, Ethan looked toward the living room where Lily sat drawing flowers on a poster board. His eyes became glassy. Grace found them. Charlotte felt tears gathering again. Yes. Ethan lowered his head for a moment. She spent years hoping for this. His voice cracked slightly. Years. Neither of them noticed Lily approaching until she appeared beside the table holding a marker in one hand. "Why are you both crying?" she asked. Ethan laughed softly through his emotions. "We are okay, sweetheart." Lily looked suspicious. That is what grown-ups always say when they are crying. Charlotte could not help smiling. Ethan reached for Lily's hand and gently pulled her closer. "Come sit with us." Lily climbed onto the chair beside him. Charlotte looked into those familiar blue eyes. The same eyes that had started this entire journey. "Lily," she said softly, "can I tell you something special?" The little girl nodded. Charlotte swallowed carefully. "A long time ago, someone in my family got separated from the people who loved her." Lily listened intently. "That is sad." "It was." Charlotte smiled gently. "But we recently discovered that person was your mommy." Lily blinked. "My mommy." "Yes." "Does that mean—" She stopped. Her young mind worked through the idea. Then her eyes widened. "Does that mean we are family?" The question landed directly in Charlotte's heart. She nodded. "Yes, Lily." The little girl stared at her for 2 full seconds. Then she smiled the biggest smile Charlotte had ever seen. "I knew it." Ethan laughed in surprise. "You knew it?" Lily nodded confidently. "You felt familiar the first day." She turned toward Charlotte. "So what are you?" Charlotte smiled through tears. "I suppose that makes me your aunt." Lily immediately wrapped her arms around her. "Hi, Aunt Charlotte." Charlotte closed her eyes as she hugged her back. In that simple moment, something missing for generations quietly found its way home. The weeks that followed brought changes none of them could have predicted. Not dramatic changes. Not the kind that appeared on magazine covers or generated headlines. The most meaningful changes arrived quietly. They arrived through phone calls that lasted longer than expected. Through shared meals around a kitchen table. Through stories that had waited decades to be told. On a cool Saturday evening in early autumn, Ethan stood in the backyard adjusting a string of warm lights above a long wooden table. Leaves drifted gently from the maple trees overhead. The smell of grilled vegetables and fresh bread filled the air. Laughter floated from the porch where Lily proudly introduced every guest to the family dog, despite the fact that everyone had already met him many times before. Charlotte watched from nearby, smiling. For years, she had attended formal dinners attended by governors, executives, and celebrities. Yet none of those events felt as meaningful as this simple gathering. There were no speeches, no photographers, no carefully planned agendas. Just family. Real family. The kind she never knew she was missing. Aunt Charlotte. Lily ran across the yard carrying a framed photograph. "Can you help me?" "Of course." Lily carefully handed her the frame. Inside was a restored photograph Charlotte had commissioned several weeks earlier. Using old family archives in Grace's collection, experts had repaired an image that had not been fully seen in decades. The photograph showed 2 young sisters standing side by side beneath a large oak tree. One was Charlotte's mother. The other was the little girl who would later become Grace Brooks. Both were smiling. Neither knew they would be separated by years of silence and unanswered questions. Charlotte stared at the image for a moment. "It is beautiful," she whispered. Lily nodded. "Mommy would have loved it." "I think so too." Together, they carried the photograph to the center of the table. Guests gradually gathered around. Conversations softened. Even Ethan grew quiet as he looked at the restored image for the first time. His eyes lingered on Grace's face. Not with sadness, with gratitude. "She finally came home," he said softly. Charlotte felt emotion rise in her chest again. Not because the pain had disappeared. Grace was still gone. Her mother was still gone. There were years that could never be recovered. Yet something important had survived. Love had survived. Family had survived. The truth had survived. As the evening continued, stories flowed freely. Walter Hensley shared memories from decades ago. Old family photographs passed from hand to hand. Lily listened to every detail with wide-eyed fascination. Each story seemed to add another missing piece to a puzzle that had taken generations to complete. Later, as twilight settled over the backyard, Lily climbed into a chair and raised her glass of lemonade. "I want to say something." The adults laughed gently and gave her their attention. Lily looked around the table. "I used to think family was just the people who lived in my house." She paused thoughtfully. Now I know family can be people who were looking for you even before they met you. Silence followed. Not an uncomfortable silence. A beautiful one. The kind that arrives when a simple truth touches every heart in the room. Charlotte reached across the table and took Ethan's hand. Lily sat between them, smiling. Above them, the string lights glowed warmly against the darkening sky. Nobody rushed to speak. Nobody wanted to break the moment. Because after decades of secrets, lost records, and unanswered questions, they finally understood something that wealth, success, and status could never teach. Home is not a place you inherit. Home is the people who make sure you are never lost again. And beneath the quiet autumn sky, surrounded by the family they had finally found, all that remained was gratitude, healing, and a silence filled with love.